Hello, everyone. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Tom Toronto to the show. Tom Toronto is the president of the Bergen County United Way in the lovely state of New Jersey. And he and his agency, over the past 17 years, have developed over 35 housing communities in the state. They have another 24 they're developing, and they have found homes for over 600 individuals with disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I wanted to talk to Tom, obviously, because this podcast is all about accessible housing. So welcome to the show, Tom.
Oh, my pleasure, Stephen. Thank you.
So that is quite an impressive feat, especially especially from one developer entity. And I know that there's such a struggle around the country to create accessible and affordable housing. So tell us a little bit about the story. How did United Way get into this, and how did you get it? How did it come to be that you have 35 housing developments and are helping so many people?
Well, Stephen, it began with sort of a recognition that the single largest issue, a human service issue in our state, repeatedly, when I say repeatedly, in terms of every needs assessment that's done, and the state requires every county in New Jersey to conduct a needs assessment on a regular basis. And all the needs assessments in all 21 counties, the number one issue, human service issue, was the lack of affordable housing. And I participated in those processes, those needs assessment processes. And what would happen is everybody would take a look at housing and they would say, oh gosh, that's systemic, too big. Let's move to number 2, 3, or 4. Mm-hmm. Well, finally, I guess the real key was in the around 2002, we organized to create a 211 helpline for the state of New Jersey. 24/7, 911 emergency, 211 for everything else. So all of these calls came in and were captured on a statewide basis. And guess what? The number one reason people were calling was, or still is, I need an affordable place to live. So now, armed with this kind of compelling data, both in terms of the needs assessment and then the daily call logs from the 211 call center, something had to be done. So in sort of scanning the environment, realizing that part of the reason why there wasn't a lot of affordable housing being produced, and particularly affordable housing for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, is that it was really upon the shoulders of the service providers to organize and build that housing. Well, it's tough enough to manage the ongoing activity of providing daily service, to also manifest the ability to master land use regulation, acquire capital, take risk with that capital, go through the entitlement process in terms of planning board meetings, et cetera. That's the reason why the development of supportable housing was basically at a trickle. And I'm not cascading the service providers. It's just a very difficult process. So around 2005, we decided that, it's sort of like Occam's razor.
Right.
What's the solution? Increase the supply of homes that people can afford. Doesn't need to be studied, doesn't need to be analyzed. It's abundantly clear you need to increase the housing stock. So our board of directors was willing to take risk with our capital. Our balance sheet was relatively strong. And my observation was that one of the reasons why affordable housing and supportive housing particularly was so minimal was an unwillingness to take risk, understand, be risk averse, most not-for-profits are, and to risk capital particularly. So we stepped into that space. And our initial approach, Stephen, was, and if you remember back around 2006 and 2007, there was a real emphasis nationally on creating home ownership.
Right.
So we were, our sort of strategy was lather, rinse, repeat. Deploy our capital, acquire a piece of property, fund construction, sell it to individuals, including individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, recoup the capital, do it again. And that was our initial model. and it worked reasonably well until the financial crisis of 2008 and 9, when we needed to change and really devote our attention to rental housing. So really, it was sort of impatience with the fact that no affordable housing was being produced, and not seeing that it was being addressed, that led us to turn into a housing development.
Wow. So have you made a dent in the housing affordability crisis in New Jersey?
Well, I think we've made a dent, and not a dent that could be fixed by the dent wizard. You'd have to go to an auto body shop to get the dent that we've created repaired. But I think we've done a couple of things. I think, yes, we've increased production because we are all about producing housing. And the other thing we've done is we've disrupted the conventional thinking around affordable housing in the state of New Jersey.
Oh, really? Talk more about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's probably an outlandish statement, and I don't say it out of hubris, but when we first started to develop affordable housing, and particularly supportive housing, affordable housing in New Jersey was a pejorative term.
Mm-hmm.
It was, if you were a local municipality, and we have 567 local municipalities in New Jersey, no one ever got elected or reelected saying, hey, I'm going to build affordable housing. Right? So NIMBY, all of that, right? And we were able to demonstrate success with initial projects, and the success was twofold. One is the projects that we built look great. We use top-notch materials, Hardy board, Anderson windows, stonework. We fit the aesthetic of the neighborhoods that we build in. And we did that because the folks that we build for deserve to live in housing that looks good. And the communities that we build in deserve to have housing that reflects the aesthetic and the style of the community. So the first projects that we did, which were in a very nice suburban community, were really sort of eye-opening for folks who had a view of affordable housing as being sort of substandard, not built well, not attractive. And we were able to show and demonstrate that affordable housing can look good. In fact, it doesn't look like affordable housing at all in terms of that sort of stereotype that people had. So the other thing that we were able to do is we were able to demonstrate that supportive housing is not for people who are the other, but rather for people who live in the community that we build in. And that was a bit of a revelation, I think, for elected officials, that the affordable housing that they can build in their town could serve a local constituency.
Right. A voting constituency. True.
But the other aspect of it too, Stephen, and I'm sure you see this in your work as well, it's very, it's not, I shouldn't say it's unusual any longer. It's rather usual that if we're at a governing body meeting or before a planning board or a zoning board of adjustment, that there isn't a member of that mayor and council or a member of that planning board or a member of that zoning board who does not have a direct connection to someone, a sibling, a nephew, a niece, a sister or brother with an intellectual developmental disability.
Right.
The other aspect of it is, when you think about it, so many high schools particularly have organized volunteer activities and community-based activities for their students. Many of those include special needs soccer teams, buddy systems for special needs individuals. So the ability to say to a mayor and council that, the folks who are living in your community, participating in your recreation programs, attending your schools, can be eligible for the housing that we're building. Well, that was a game changer.
Wow. So over the years, apart from going from a purchase model to a rental model, I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes in some of the priorities around the developments you're building. And you've got a whole bunch of projects in development too, over 20, you told me 24 of them.
In the pipeline,
So you've Yeah, you see, you got a lot going on in terms of new stuff. How have things changed? How is the strategy, the thinking around it, how the site is going to be developed and used and lived in? How has that changed in the last 17 years since you started?
Well, when we started out, as I mentioned earlier, the development of affordable housing or supportive housing was the province of the service provider.
Right.
We came along and we created a model that was consumer based. So we built supportive housing, independent living apartments that were spec housing, if you will. We built them. We created a application process so that so it was open to the community at large. The model up to that point was you needed to be affiliated with a service provider. That
Right.
service provider built the housing, and then the residents or clients, I should say, of that service provider then occupied the housing that was built. So nothing wrong with that, but it was kind of a narrow lane. And we came along and we sort of changed the nature of supportive housing to make it much more open. And that was a bit of a struggle with the state's Department of Developmental Disabilities because they were used to a much more closely regulated housing production environment where they were participating with the service provider in terms of who got to live where.
Right. Right. And has that allowed for a more inclusive housing approach where some of the people living in the community are not necessarily identifying with a disability group or a disability, intellectual or developmental disability community, so to speak?
Well, what's happened is that it's a consumer-based model now for the service providers. So in some of our projects, we don't have a single dedicated service provider. We have multiple service providers. And further, the residents see how their roommate or a neighbor across the hall is being treated or cared for or supported versus how they might be treated and supported. And they're making switches based on what they're seeing as an enhanced service or a better standard of service. Not that it happens frequently, but it injects a little bit of I don't want to say accountability, but certainly consumer preference, right?
Is there any kind of limit on the extent of care needed to support a person with an intellectual or developmental disability that you impose upon people who lease units in your buildings? That is to say, could someone who has a 24/7 care need live in one of your buildings alongside someone who's high functioning autistic and is pretty independent, but still needs some sort of social service support? Do those things go together? How do you manage those discrepancies in the care needs in terms of what you're developing?
So the short answer is yes. We have licensed units that are apartment dwellings, and we commingle folks with higher need and folks with less need for service support. What's interesting is that when you asked me earlier, what's changed over the years. When we first started, we were kind of either we built an independent living, small apartment building for folks who did not require support, on a 24/7 basis, or we built a 4-bedroom group home. And what would happen is that we began to realize that if we were building in a particular community and we built one type of housing, we shut the door for folks who might require 24/7 support. Or
Right.
we did 24/7 support and we shut the door for folks who could live with more independence. So that led us to blend the models. And again, at that point, that disrupted the convention because it was either or. And you either had a licensed unit and you couldn't have licensed units next to unlicensed units. Well, now you can. And not only that, but we've also mixed populations. So we have built senior housing with inclusionary supportive housing with inclusionary family housing. So we've done all three in the same project. So we have found that blending populations, which initially was, I would say that folks were fearful of that, particularly the service community. Has turned out to be very successful because it creates a community.
Right.
Particularly with seniors now, younger folks who are in their independent living units or in their licensed units now have like an adopted grandfather, adopted grandmother. We build community rooms in all of our projects, and our housing services coordinators, their job is to integrate the communities within the projects that we build. So everyone's, meeting together and socializing together. We have movie nights, we have trips, all that. And we're also bringing in the larger community, whether it's the Rotary, the Kiwanis, the Women's Club, so that we have all kinds of activities going on within the supportive housing project or the mixed use affordable housing project. So no one is skeptical or wonders what happens, right?
Right.
Part of the community.
Right. And what is the average number of units in each of these new developments? Let's just talk about the ones that you're working to build. What do you how many? What's the average size in terms of units?
So I would say that our specialty, if you will, is the 12 to 16 to 20 unit small apartment building.
Yeah.
A good example is we were successful in securing 9% low-income housing tax credits for a project in South Orange, New Jersey. Wonderful downtown, has a performing arts center, a train, transit village. It's a 26-unit project, 16 units of supportive housing, and 10 family units for low and moderate income families, all in one building, a small high-rise.
Wow. So have you found, I've done a lot of interviews on this show with in the area of technology and how smart home technology is really changing the way service providers provide service, the way consumers live in their homes, all around the issue of access. Have you found that has touched your projects, and in what ways?
So everything is fully wired.
Mhm.
So there's full technology availability, wireless, a hard cable. And we have, I don't want to say elaborate, but we have fob systems for doors. So a lot of technology is at work in terms of the apartments and the group homes. I would tell you though that probably the biggest technological innovation for the population has been Uber and Lyft.
Ah,
So transportation is always a big issue,
right.
and accessibility to transportation. So, there's Access Link, there's public transportation, but in terms of freedom and flexibility, freedom of movement and flexibility, rideshare has been, I think, an extraordinary boom for our residents.
That's really interesting because I know there have been lawsuits about the inaccessibility of Uber and Lyft vehicles for people who use wheelchairs or who have other physical impediments.
Well, for the folks who are independent living and
Yeah.
are pretty ambulatory, it's not an issue. You are correct,
Yeah.
somewhat limited, and that's where the access links.
Yeah.
And the other thing we're finding is we've made linkages in particular communities. Many of them have van accessibility, accessible van service for seniors.
Right.
And now we include our projects in those loops so folks can get to downtown shopping or to the shopping center, the supermarket. So we're making leveraging what are in some communities pretty good senior transportation systems.
What about smart home technology? Has that come into play in any of the work you're doing? Have you, does it
Not
touch you?
it's an opportunity for us, but I can't tell you that we're in the vanguard yet on that. Part of the challenge, and this is still the work to be done, is we face cost caps for the projects that we do, and we always run into strong discussions with
Animated conversations, right?
a lot of our projects are underwritten by the State Housing Mortgage Finance Agency, and for your listeners, every state in the country, to a greater or lesser extent, has a housing mortgage finance agency. And their job is to underwrite and subsidize the development of affordable housing. So, so folks should Google their local state housing mortgage finance agency. Some are more robust than others. And it's a matter of public record to find out what they're underwriting, what's being built. So a good source, a potential source for capital to build supportive housing at the jurisdictional level where folks might be listening. But the thing that we're doing, and I think we're building in more elasticity in the underwriting, is that we're suggesting to our battle with the Housing Mortgage Finance Agency is don't do hardy board, do vinyl. Don't do.
That's what they're telling you.
Well, they want our projects, to be less
keep
expensive.
The cost down, of course.
Yeah. And our argument back to them is, we're here because the mayor looked at what we built in another town and saw how good it looked.
Right.
And that's how we were able to secure this property and to get through the entitlement process. And furthermore, when we spend more on the front end to build a solid project,
yes,
solid, with plywood, not particle board, with hardy, it looks better for the long term, and it costs less in upkeep
to maintain. Sure.
Yeah. So and each project is its own brochure. So an example, we're building a project, plan to build a project in Bayonne, a 40-unit high-rise building, 20 senior units, 20 supportive housing units, a tight site. We're doing 2 floors of structured parking, and then 4 living floors above. We're going to have spectacular views of Lower Manhattan.
Wow.
So we're putting a roof deck up. We have a community room, but we want outdoor space, and we don't really have opportunity for outdoor space because it's a tight urban site. We're putting a roof deck on the roof. Well, the argument is that's expensive. Don't put that roof deck in. You can lower your cost per square foot. But how can you build a building that has the potential for these spectacular views and not have an amenity like a roof deck, right? So that's the kind of battles that we have to try to lift those cost caps so that we can put in the kinds of amenities, that are particularly useful, build community, and make it a great place to live. But that's the that's the struggle when it comes to like smart home technology. That's where the argument has to be had that we need to invest more in technology in the building, and I think we're turning the corner a bit on that.
I speak with people in lots of different states, and I know there are states and advocates in those states who would hear a number like 24 units in development, 24 developments in progress, and they would just be flabbergasted because they're lucky to be able to get 1 or 2 projects that going through at any time in their jurisdictions, in their counties, whatever. What's the secret sauce? Why are you able to get so many projects going through one agency? And what is it about New Jersey? Like, is there something unique about the state and its governance? Is there something about the air quality? Something in the air? Why are you able to do this when so many states struggle to build affordable, accessible housing?
So here's the thing that makes New Jersey a little bit unique and accounts for our success. New Jersey, and I think there's only one other state, that being Massachusetts, where the state constitution requires communities to account for affordable housing development.
It's in the Constitution. Wow.
It is actually a statutory requirement. And there was created an entity called the Council on Affordable Housing, shorthand COA. And it became a real lightning rod. So the Council on Affordable Housing would study municipalities, work with planners, and they would create a number and say to a community, this is what you have to build. And for many years, communities could do a couple of things. They could not build and send their and buy out of their obligation by sending dollars to another community. They were called regional contributions. And that allowed, and what that did is, folks bought out of an obligation to build. And then what they would do is often build senior housing, because senior housing is often required. And in New Jersey, an easy solution, because the fear with affordable housing in New Jersey is that if you build affordable family housing, you're going to increase your school population. So the enemy is an 8-year-old with a backpack. So COA, Council on Affordable Housing, became sort of like this, very, very Mandarin agency, and communities were able to do studies. They would send money elsewhere. And at the end of the day, not much production. And then several years ago, the Council on Affordable Housing was disbanded, kind of for lack of production, and the rules and regulations, or the umpires for affordable housing, became Superior Court judges at the county level. And often Superior Court judges who came up through the land use ranks as practicing attorneys, so they were hip to housing development and how it works. And they injected a performance requirement, saying, okay, enough study, tell us what you're going to build and tell us where you're going to build. So at the same time that this happened, we were just hitting our stride. So municipalities saw what we were building, saw who we were building for, and reached out to us to say, hey, can you come and take a look at this former bank building, this former gas station, or we're willing to buy a piece of property. Can you point to something that you think would be a good site location, because we have to fulfill our affordable housing obligation. So in a sense, Stephen, it created this upward pressure on the part of municipalities, and they looked for a solution. And I like to think we're easy to work with. We build a particularly attractive housing product, if you will. We size that product to the dimensions, if you will, and the aesthetic of the community. We're not building 100 units. We're building smaller projects that are at a very human scale. So we're a very appealing partner.
So we don't have a lot more time left. I do want to ask you, what advice, with all your years of experience, I understand you've been in this field generally for 38 years doing this sort of work. Is that accurate?
Actually, 40 now.
Okay, 40.
I have to update my profile.
So my question for you is, what advice would you give to housing developers and disability advocates in other states that don't have the benefit of a constitutional mandate around creating more accessible housing?
So that constitutional mandate certainly extraordinarily helpful, but every project of ours, Stephen, has started with a parent or a guardian in that community going to the mayor or the mayor and council saying, hey, have you seen what these guys built over here and for whom they've built? And it's that parent or that guardian that has gotten us that initial audience, if you will, with the mayor, the council president, the planner, the administrator, whoever it might be. And there's 567 municipalities in New Jersey. I just live in one of them. So I am not meaningful in 566 other municipalities. But a parent who lives in that municipality, that person's meaningful to that mayor. And the pain point for that mayor is, what am I going to do about affordable housing? And with us, he sees a solution, or she sees the solution. And that's how it comes about. So my advice is that look at the Housing Mortgage Finance Agency in your community. Look at how supportive housing is funded and built in your state or in your county. Understand that, and then lobby at the local level. And that's how projects get built.
Wonderful, wonderful. I really appreciate your time today. One last question. Obviously, I'm not getting to all the questions that some of my listeners will have. I never am able to get all the questions in my time frame. What if people want to know more, Tom? How do they get a hold of you or your agency to learn more about your projects, your model?
Sure, they can go to our website, BergenUnitedWay.org. They can also shoot me an email, ttoronto@BergenUnitedWay.org, which is also on the website.
Right.
And we have videos on our website of some of our builds. We have our project tracker, which is what I had sent to you. We also have applications. Every project that we build has its own application. So there's not like as there is for colleges and universities, like a universal application. There's every application or every project stands on its own and has to have its own application. So they're at the website as well. So folks can get a feel for, what does it look like to make application for housing.
Well, I will put all that in my show notes, and I just want to thank you again for coming on my show and talking about your work. It's inspiring, and I just wish you could do it more and everywhere. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Stephen. All right. Take care.